Hello. Hi, everybody. I see we have some people in the Zoom already. So thanks everybody for being here. It'll probably take a couple of minutes for people to kind of filter in. So welcome to everybody who's here already. We are thrilled to have you here. Thanks for taking the time. Happy Friday. My name is Nate Bauer. I'm the director and the acquisitions editor for the University of Alaska Press in Fairbanks, Alaska. And yeah, we're very happy to have everybody here for a very exciting event tonight. We're happy to have both Katie Eberhart and Peggy Shoemaker here with us, and thankful for all of you too. So I won't take very much time. I want to get into the reading as soon as possible, but I do want to introduce our illustrious guests here. I also want to thank Fireside Books in Palmer, Alaska for co-hosting this event. I want to direct everybody before we get started to make sure and check out Cabin 135 at the Fireside Books website. They have an online store. I've posted the link. You can also find their website at the link here, goodbooksbadcoffee.com. It's a very creative and fun web domain. But here in the chat, if you look, I will make sure that everybody has the link there. Please go and buy the book if you haven't already, that Katie will be reading from tonight, which is our newest entry in the Alaska Literary Series at University of Alaska Press. Great. Okay, so let's see here. A second, just making sure that everybody is on the same page. Okay, looks like we have some more people in here. So thanks again to everybody. Katie Eberhart writes with a keen curiosity about rootedness, how a lived in place reveals its stories, and how stories from past generations merge with our own. Katie has a Master of Arts in Creative Writing and degrees in economics, geography, and agricultural economics. Her chapbook, Unbound Alaska Poems, was published in 2013, and her book, Cabin 135, that she'll be reading from tonight, was published, is available now and was published in 2020. Peggy Shoemaker, who will be joining us later, is editor of the Boreal Books series, which is an imprint of Red Hen Press, and she's also the editor of the Alaska Literary Series at our own University of Alaska Press, poetry editor at Persimmon Tree, and contributing editor for Alaska Quarterly Review. And we're thrilled to have both of them here. And without further ado, I am going to turn it over to the author, and I will say, take it away, Katie. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Nate. Always seems like quite a transition to end up talking to a screen, the Zoom screen, and I look like I'm talking to myself. So, oh well. Thank you everyone who's coming, and I see I've got friends here, people I know, people I don't know on the attendee list. So thank you, and I'm just really grateful to UA Press and Peggy Shoemaker for making publication of my book happen, and it's been a really long project. First, the lived-in part, which was, I don't know, decades. And then the writing part, like 10 years. So I need to tell you that the Cabin 135 is a house with a really unique history. And my husband and I, Chuck Logston, moved there in 1983, lived there for almost 30 years. It was built for the Matanuska Colony, which was one of the FDR New Deal projects in the 1930s. And I think Nate has posted a link in the chat to the Palmer Historical Society. So if you are looking for more information about what the Matanuska Colony was and starting from scratch, that's a good place to start. And the really short version of what it was a way to get farmers, farm families they ended up being from the upper Midwest, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, to give them another chance to farm somewhere else. So the farms, farmers that were having a lot of trouble because of the economic and environmental issues during the Great Depression. So, so I think what I'll do is and this book is creative nonfiction, so it has a real combination of my lived experience, historical information, and me imagining things that may have happened in the past. So as where I write in the book, I'm very clear when I'm like moving into this imaginary world. So like I will read about how I imagined the colonists who were the ones who lived in the house we call cabin 135 first. What happened? Cabin. Clistia and Henry LaRose were accepted as colonists because they knew how to farm. They arrived in Palmer on one of the colonist transport trains. During the land lottery on May 23rd, 1935, Henry picked tract 135. Clistia and Henry leafed through a catalog of houses and selected one of the log cabin plans. That summer, workers hired by the U.S. government began building cabin 135. The LaRoses moved in even before construction was finished. On an overcast day in 1935, the photographer Willis T. Geisman stood slightly downhill from cabin 135. He set up a wooden tripod with a large camera on top and carefully inserted a frame holding film. He opened the shutter to expose the film, documenting the nearly complete construction of cabin 135 for the Matanuska colony. Okay, so the other unique thing about this book is that it has a lot of little sections. It has a scheme of repeating themes so that the reader won't get lost among my ideas and my digressions. So the themes will be like cabin, earth, terrain, ice, wind, time, and there's a number of other ones. And so it's kind of like meeting an old friend again as you read through this book, and you'll be, oh, there's the cabin again. Oh, wait, she's out in the garden. So continuing on where I just was, the new section is time. 70 years later, I study the photograph, gleaning what I can of time and place. With no obvious foundation and a dozen logs splayed across the slope, the cabin appears to have risen organically from the ground. Scaffolding, used as a platform to reach the steeply pitched roof, remained attached to the log walls. I didn't realize the first time I saw this photograph that it was of our house. The picture could have been any cabin built atop a roughly cleared knoll. I was struck by the idea that stumps in the adjacent forest were from trees used to build the house. Later, I learned that logs for the colony cabins were harvested and milled elsewhere in the valley. The logs were likely white spruce, a common tree in south central Alaska. Spruce that grows slowly, the timber dense and straight-grained. In the 1935 photo, no one stands outside in view of the camera. No one even peers out a window. Perhaps the photographer asked everyone to step away because his job was to document structures, not families. Despite the scaffolding and absence of people, the cabin appears inhabited. Curtains hang in the windows, and a chimney protrudes through the roof. A tall, narrow window in the east-facing gable indicates a second floor, or at least plans for one. Cabin. Looking at the colony era photograph of cabin 135, I imagine myself inside the cabin, as if a doorway through time remained ajar. The cabin smells of new logs, wood smoke backdrafts from an iron-cooked stove. A ladder leans against a ceiling joist. I scramble up to investigate the upstairs. The steeply pitched roof and unfinished walls make the attic seem small and claustrophobic. A narrow window in each gable contributes light that is largely absorbed by the roof boards. The flooring is familiar but unpainted, tongue and groove boards solidly laid. My footsteps echo in the hard-edged space. Sooner rather than later, a staircase will replace the ladder. After that, walls and doorways will separate two bedrooms, each with a single window. Eventually, someone will create a third room by hacking off a section of roof and installing a wide dormer. The dormer will face south with a tremendous view of Pioneer Peak through a heedlessly small window. Okay, so I'm going to skip around and have a few sections to read. Let's see. Okay. And we're going to go on, if I can get my scheme for navigating where I want to be to go. Okay, that was that one. Yes, I thought I was organized. Okay, so the cabin is I wanted to write a book with a cabin as a kind of character. And as you read the book, you'll probably, I hope, get the idea that that's actually, the cabin was a character in our lives. So, but I was also very interested in the surroundings, the garden, the yard. This cabin was on 10 acres, and then there was some open land around it and some forest. So here's a section that starts forest. On the lookout for spring, I prowled the woods behind the house, intent on finding the orchids as soon as they erupted, like pale winter legs through dry leaves. Orchids were a new occupant. There hadn't been any in this scrap of forest until I spied some at a nursery. Like the inclination to rescue a puppy from a shelter, I bought a pot of fairy slippers, Calypso bulbosa, hoping to find a suitable site for them in the forest north of the house. Birch and spruce had been growing and falling and rotting there for a very long time, centuries probably, or millennia. I knew, though, that grass, wildflowers, and shrubs grew more densely than in predominantly spruce forests, where colonies of orchids flourished along moss-covered humps of rotted logs. I lay on my stomach between thorny rose stems and pale shoots of wild geraniums. Sun dappled the forest floor and my back. Mere inches tall, the orchids bristled with brushy yellow centers flanked by pink petals like the wings of a miniature tropical bird. An orange-butted bumblebee buzzed past my face and plunked into a tiny orchid that swayed beneath her weight. The bee wallowed in pollen, then leaning, reaching, and clambering onto another bloom, where she lost her grip and slid down the stem. Instead of climbing, she whirred upward, alighting on another orchid. The bumblebee, her legs already thickly coated with pollen, resumed her labor. I had a front row seat, so to speak, lying on my belly in dry leaves, contemplating bumblebee and orchid. This view of nature was small and quiet and personal. The scene felt almost invisible, and it would have been for anyone who never ventures into the forest or who doesn't look down. I was watching an enduring ritual, yet my actions were part of the story. I had purchased the orchid. I had planted it there. I hoped it would thrive. Although I wondered about the origin of that orchid, what rotting tree had it been lifted from for a mercenary endeavor? I hoped the orchid had been raised specifically for the plant nursery, but I had my doubts. Okay, so there's that section. I'm skipping around. That was in the first 100 pages of the book. And let's see, am I going to stay with the garden? Yes. So this is a slightly longer section, and you'll see it has more of a human story involved with it. Earth. The garden intrigues me. Summer had not quite arrived when I yanked out an overgrown and rambling flower called Snow in Summer and unwove a thatch of bulging iris rhizomes, digging and chopping and replanting more than before. I clipped broken branches, transplanted a mountain ash seedling, and tied a spindly honeysuckle to a stake, hoping that would help it stand up to the weight of snow. Gardening, I'm empress and laborer, nanny and tutor. I attempt to direct growth, but also find much that's out of control. Is this what I learned from my grandmother? The physical and mental effort required to eradicate and excise, but also the patience and imagination to experiment. Each summer I anticipate how the garden story will unfold, but a new twist always surprises me. The garden speaks shape, color, sound, and motion. And time. The garden is macro and micro, ideas and plans. The garden is only semi-tamed. This garden appeals to my senses. I breathe scents of flowers. Birds trill. I hear a beguiling whisper of wings. The trees have leaf by the time I'm on my knees beneath the old lilac, raking dried leaves with my fingers and lifting the detritus into a bucket. The earth leaches dampness through the fabric of my jeans. Prodding for grass roots, I turn up a bird wing and a minuscule skull, bleached white, the beak bone curved like a fingernail. Above me, window glass mirrors clouds and shrubs, conjuring a phantom landscape deadly to birds. Beside me, lilac branches with the girth of small trees protrude from a gnarled root knob, like a botanical being in a Tolkien landscape. Beneath the shrub, a carpet of lilac sprouts has even invaded pernicious clots of clover. I blame myself for the seedlings because I neglected to clip the lilac's faded blooms the previous summer. Seeds matured and dropped, thousands of them. Hoeing would have offered a quicker way to excise the sprouts, but I felt empathy, for once, for the old lilac's progeny. Digging with a trowel, I lifted out several clumps and packed the seedlings into buckets. After that, and feeling somewhat absolved, I callously yanked the remaining lilac shoots, tossing them along with hunks of clover into the wheelbarrow. Later, I dumped the wheelbarrow at the edge of the woods and carefully placed 2 little tubs of lilacs on the shady north side of the garage. I intended to transplant the sprouts, perhaps along the edge of the lawn, where in a dozen years they would form a fragrant hedge. More than a mere shrub, the lilac has a knack for nudging memories. When I was growing up, every place my family lived had a lilac bush, usually large and overgrown, beside the house. When I was 6 or 7, Mom showed us how to make May Day baskets by folding and taping heavy paper into little boxes. My sisters and I filled the handmade boxes with fresh lilac blooms and hung them on the neighbors' doorknobs. Seattle, though, has a mild climate, and my memory of lilacs blooming on the 1st of May strikes me as reasonable. A May Day basket stuffed with lilacs from my Alaska garden would be impossible because a lilac doesn't bloom until June. A few weeks later, I was pulling vetch that had threaded columbines in a plot reclaimed from the driveway by the front door. A pickup truck turned off the road and slowly motored toward our house. Expecting the occupants were evangelists or selling something, I considered various greetings in the vein of, "I'm not interested." The truck parked and a middle-aged man climbed unhurriedly out of the cab. He stared at me doubtfully. "My mother is looking for trees and saw your bush," he said. The trees Chuck and I had planted across the lawn had not yet grown large enough to block the view of our yard. The large lilac with its cloud of lavender blooms was perfectly visible from the road. An old woman wearing a cotton dress and headscarf clambered out of the passenger seat and walked slowly toward me. Her pale eyes met mine, and she spoke deliberately, as if each word was a great effort or of the utmost importance. "Bush," she said, and after a pause, "flower." She swept her hands expansively, as if holding a bouquet, inhaling audibly. She smiled at the notion of a delightful fragrance. I smiled back at her, cradling my own invisible bouquet and breathing the aromatic scent of lilacs. She beamed, her smile becoming a grin, and blurted, "Home, like home." Migration. I shared something fundamental with this woman, something as crucial to identity as memories and stories, and more deep-seated than a nostalgia, the longing for a familiar landscape of food, flowers, and trees. I hadn't emigrated across an ocean to a place where the language and even the alphabet was different. I had only migrated from the Pacific Northwest, but that move encompassed a shift from desert steppe to subarctic. Uprooted from another life, the old woman grasped at memories like birds to hold and give to her children. Whatever actual circumstances led her to my doorstep, she yearned for lilacs, a shrub that attracts hummingbirds and butterflies, wafts perfume through open windows, and freshens memories. Earth. I motioned toward the gnarled shrub with pale lavender blooms. Lilac, lilac, she repeated, her eyes crinkling. The man smiled but didn't say anything. I walked around the garage and brought back a tub of lilac sprouts. Here, take these, I said. They'll grow like home. Thank you, she said, smiling even more. Like home, she said with utmost satisfaction. Thank you, the man repeated. The two of them climbed into the pickup and drove slowly away. Migration. I did not see this pair again, and I only surmised that they migrated to Alaska after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. Even 3 decades later, I find this story oddly unsettling, and I puzzle over the confluence of events that brought the older woman and somewhat younger man to my house, where I handed them a bucket of lilac sprouts, which made the old woman very happy. The questions raised are multiple and profound, and they have no answers, except to recognize that in dire situations we adapt or we migrate and attempt to adapt. Okay, so let me see. I have a plan. I'm going to read one more short section. And I want to jump back to the house. Okay, cabin. So, this is in the first third of the book too. Part of that. Actually, today I'm reading everything is from the first third of the book. So you're getting more of an intro to how the book gets going. Cabin. The house did not come with an owner's manual, although in the basement, cardboard labels dangling from copper pipes indicated which direction to turn the valves in order to switch from the oil furnace to the coal furnace, or vice versa. The oil furnace was situated in the basement. The garage housed the coal-burning furnace. Both furnaces heated and pumped water through a system of baseboard radiators. The steep-pitched cabin roof transitioned to a nearly flat roof over the garage. Inside the garage, the log house wall had been coated with urethane, a sprayed-on chemical intended for insulation. The original insulation laid along each log as the walls were being erected would have been oakum, jute-like fibers embedded with a tarry substance, or maybe moss. The urethane hid the logs and any hint of oakum or moss. A layer of gray paint as dingy as river silt did not improve the wall's lumpy appearance. When we moved in, urethane also blanketed the roof. An uncommon roofing material, the inch-thick foam was painted with a silvery compound that was supposed to be waterproof. The shiny surface attracted magpies that pecked holes in the roofing, exposing crisp and porous foam underneath. We hired a roofing contractor who replaced the bird-pecked roofing with composite shingles on the steep cabin roof and hot mop tar onto the garage roof. The contractor also added 6 inches of insulation to the cabin roof and installed a layer of plywood over the garage roof boards to increase stability, he said. At the time, we did not notice anything structurally amiss in the garage. So, I guess I have a question to Nate, whether I can read a little bit more, or is it time to stop? Or for Peggy. Okay.
Well, tell you what, I could ask you some questions and then you can decide if you want to read anything else.
Okay, okay, that sounds good. And I would like to say one thing though, just as I finish that, about the walls, the roof, the furnaces. So I could make a pitch to everybody in the audience that this book has something for everybody. It has nature, it has a garden, it has all this deep diving into how this house worked and stuff, just lots of strange stuff. So I have had comments from people who are like, there's too much about the house, there's too much about the garden. It just depends on your perspective, and I like it all.
Absolutely. I was thinking about, as you and Chuck were making this house livable and making it right for your family, you uncovered a whole lot of things. For example, windows and doors and stairways, but you also uncovered the limits of your budget and the limits of your patience. Could you talk a little about what it uncovered in your inner life when you were doing all that renovation?
Oh my gosh. Okay, let's work on this one. It's always much harder to talk about your inner life than the budgets and the strange things that you find as you're going along. So when Chuck and I moved in to this house in 1983, and of course the book gives you some more backstory about how we, at least some of how we ended up there. We were so young. So we had a lot of ideas and a lot of goals. And one of the things that Chuck mentions, and he's hanging out downstairs on this call too. He's in a different room, so I can't see him right now. Was that he said it was like a sandbox. Here we had this place to try to learn how to do things. I mean, we each knew how to do some things, but we were, in our mid to late 20s, I guess. Maybe Chuck was older than that. So we were learning a lot as we went along, and I think there was a lot of frustration and a lot of kind of just deciding to do stuff and not worrying about the consequences. As far as Peggy, I'm thinking about this inner life question as I talk about this. I think you end up. I've thought about that a lot more being older. I think when you're young, you're not really. I mean, at least I wasn't really groveling in my inner life so much. I was doing stuff. So
what a great attitude to say this is a chance for us to learn how to do things. That's a wonderful attitude when you have an older home that you're trying to bring new life to this older home. There was someone who sent an email question who asks you, is it easier to write about Alaska when you're living out of state? What do you think?
Oh, okay. I would say so much of the writing of the book was while I was in Alaska. So
it doesn't pertain to this book especially.
The massive amount of revising I did living out of state. So I think the bones of the book already existed in so much of the writing. I think I was more learning how I wanted to write, and getting feedback and deciding what worked and what didn't, and what advice to take and what advice to ignore on the writing. So if I lived in the state, it would be easier if I wanted to, go somewhere and fact check something. But of course, we have the internet. But I had, I don't know, hundreds of pages of journals, maybe thousands of pages of journals. So a lot of personal experience, which is in this book, detailed, about the garden and a lot of that. that's not something you can particularly fact check. So, I mean, having all my journals at one point in the very long revising process, I took an Excel spreadsheet and I indexed my journals up through 2011. I have a giant spreadsheet that has all of the journal entries summarized topically so that I could go find things if I wanted to have, I guess, the liveliness of the writing of what I wrote in a journal at the time. I mean, it would be heavily revised to be in the book, but having that core and being able to get those memories back, maybe more accurately because I wrote them down than I might just remember. So I don't know that I answered your question.
No, being that organized is a little frightening. But good for you. Good for you. Well, you've talked a little about the recurring section heads, and sometimes the little sections are only a paragraph long, and yet you come back to ice and wind and water and forest and migration and time. Talk about those recurring headings as an organizational principle.
Okay. I didn't think of that. I think that was Don Morano's suggestion about
who Don Morano is.
She's a wonderful editorial consultant. I think she's been with a couple different universities and has a consulting business. And in fact, my information about whatever she's doing is quite a few years old now. But
yeah, she's retired now.
She's retired. Okay. But she went through 2 different drafts and had just the most insightful questions and ideas, which created an enormous amount of work, but the opportunity for me to learn more. So yeah.
It's interesting that some people think that you just sit down and you write your book. And I think it's a very good thing for a lot of people to hear that sometimes you need help, and sometimes you need more help than your friends can offer you, even when your friends are good writers and when your friends are good editors. And it doesn't hurt a bit to find someone like Don Morano who will look at it with a professional eye and ask you the right questions.
Yes. I totally agree with that. And Peggy, I appreciate your input along the way. And, you helped me find Dawn. So
well,
that was fantastic.
You're welcome. Could you talk a little, you said that it took 10 years really to pull together. It took 10 years or 30 years of living and 10 years of writing to pull this together. That's a lot of lived experience. And how did you decide, no, truly, how did you decide what to leave out?
Oh no.
It's really hard. It's
hard. My gosh. A lot of it was, so let's see, I think most of the writing was between about 20, revising serious, really focused revising, maybe between about 2012 and 2018 or so. And I have entire sections that are on the computer and in, a file cabinet. Here's one. So Chuck and I, there's travel in this when it suits the purpose of the book, and getting up into the Arctic to be able to talk about ice and some climate change stuff was important for me to have in this book. And Chuck and I, over some years, we did 2 road trips into the Arctic, one in Alaska to Prudhoe Bay, one in Canada up to the town of Inuvik, and then took a plane up to the Arctic coast. I wanted both of those in there, but so the Alaska section going to Prudhoe Bay is in, but the Canadian one is not, because it would have overwhelmed the structure of the book. So I had to choose one. So I felt nobody told me I had to choose one, but I felt I had to choose one because I couldn't devote so much time. If I left them both in, someone might have told me I had to choose one, but it's still, I have to find a home for that, which is kind of an essay right now that's set in Canada because it's interesting. So
you will. You will. Nancy Lord has sent a question. She says, I love the structure of this book, Katie. How did you discover what it should be? And did you have other texts that were models of some sort?
Oh, let's see. Well, the idea came from Dawn, but then being able to move forward with it. And Dawn didn't have the headings. I mean, she said, well, cabin is probably a heading and maybe earth, you know. She said, she threw out about 3 and, you know, kind of a starting point. But I feel like I have to look at my my bookshelf. There's a book for the time being, and it's not Annie Dillard, and I'm not thinking of the right author right now, but it has a wonderful structure that has repeating headings in it. And that was very interesting for me to go through that book again and think about whether, you know, to see it as a model in a totally different kind of book, and think about how it would work in this case. And one of the reasons, and I think what Dawn was getting at, was to try not to leave the reader confused, because I was making jumps, and in my mind, the jumps are great. I think there's no forces of time in my mind. I can be 50 years ago, I can be in the future, and I don't know if that comes from being maybe getting training as an economist, or just that my mind just works that way. So I don't see what the problem is.
Well, it's great to rattle around in your mind in this book. Valerie Hallinan asks, how did you decide the order of the sections and which sections should be placed side by side? Was it intuitive, or was there a strategy? Did your strategy change much as you evolved and revised the book? How challenging was that process?
How challenging is that question? Thank you, Val, for asking that question. I really appreciate it. Okay. I spent a lot of time thinking about it. I would have to say it was probably mostly intuitive, but I also felt I needed to have some rules, or, you know, rules to break, but rules to help. And since I wanted the house to be a character, and the house has some, you know, characteristics. I talk about it like it's the uncle who thinks of the funny prank, or the pranks that nobody else finds funny. So that to have it be a character, I had to keep repeating that, you know, here's a section about the cabin, and then we're going to go somewhere else out in the garden, or to an archaeology dig, or up and pull invasive weeds in Denali National Park. I mean, a wider spreading of the stories. But we're always going to come back to the cabin. So I want the reader to know you're coming back to the cabin. Even if you come with me somewhere else, the cabin's going to be there. So that had to be, you know, kind of anchoring the repeating scheme. And then the book, I was thinking of it kind of as concentric circles in a way, like the geography. So garden is very close to the house. Forest is a little farther from the house. There's some terrain. I sort of use terrain as something that's not, well, earth is garden, forest is forest. Terrain is anything that's farther away, that's outdoors, nature oriented. And so there's some other places in the Matanuska Valley that I found had meaning within the context of the book. And then there's a few, I think I totally lost the question right here, but then there's a few headings that are specific geographic places because they're too big and too important to just lump into something called terrain. So example, I mentioned Denali National Park. There's an archaeology dig, that's the Knik dig in the Matanuska Borough Valley area. Switzerland, Iceland, the Arctic. So, I guess mainly my question, besides making sure that cabin kept showing up over and over again, was it had to be intuitive and trying to on a more micro level, not have it be too jarring from one section to another. If I took out all the section headings, I would like to think that I had some topical or idea concept that was going to lead you to the next section without the little heading there. That's the best I can do with
They're
that.
subtle, they're quiet, they're inobtrusive, and I think that they do their job. I think they're just fine. You also kept horses as well as a big garden and all of the other things you did. Will you just tell people about one named Tanya and whose previous owners did not tell you that she was terrified of a particular animal?
She was, oh, yeah, actually, the animal she's terrified of that she makes it into the book. The reason for that is it's 40 below and the animal is a moose. And she was also terrified by pigs. So,
Man, so you have a wonderful dramatic sequence when Tanya has gotten herself so flustered that she's sweating profusely and she could die of hypothermia.
absolutely, absolutely.
And as you walk her and put on dry blankets, you're in danger yourself. You know, and there was no warm place to take her.
No horse-sized hair dryer, no heated garage. Would have been great to have a heated garage.
Yeah, in some ways you and Chuck just meet each challenge as it comes, but that one seemed especially frightening because
Yeah.
she could have died, you could have died. Yeah,
Well,
but your prose is very strong.
Thank you. Thank you. I think the horse could have died. I think it's less likely I would have died.
Well, you got plenty cold.
Plenty cold. Yeah, that was one of 2 times when we lived there that it was 40 below zero at our house. I mean, we think of 40 below as the Fairbanks weather. In the Matanuska Valley, we have the terrible wind, so the wind chill can be so bad that it's like that, but not just still air in 40 below. So that was very frightening. The horse had been having a panic attack in her stall, and when I found her, she was soaking wet, like she'd just run a race, and it was 40 below. So that was an issue.
Yeah, I guess. Oh, Nancy has said, For the Time Being is by Annie Dillard. And she says, you were correct.
That's correct.
Unusual book.
Okay.
And Carrie Gordon says, the structure works for me, especially leaping from Alaska to Central Washington. Must be the geologist in me. Key. Thank you for weaving history and the land into the story.
Oh, thank you, Carrie. And thank you, Nancy. Well, okay, I just wasn't sure if it was Annie Dillard, and my bookcase is behind me.
Yeah, but it's interesting the way that you deal with time, and you deal with geologic time, of course, you deal with the seasons because they're so important in your garden. You deal with the history of that particular cabin and the area that surrounds it. So time becomes a character of its own in a way in this book.
Yeah, that's right. And one of my, and the book is about my concerns. I have a lot of concerns, but I can't just say, these are my concerns. That would be boring. But memory is a big concern of mine, and especially like societal memory and how fast we forget things. And so some of the aspects of bringing time into the book, I hope, show how we just, we don't know anymore about certain things that happened before. And some of my examples may be very generic, like I keep revisiting the raspberry patch. So the raspberry patch is, part of the garden, and somebody planted it sometime. And I found it very interesting, and I still find it very interesting to think about. What if finding raspberries to be interesting from both a flavor aspect and how the plants grow and some family stories, but they're a plant that people have eaten, in Europe and Northern Europe and America and probably lots of places for a long time, and to just wonder how rooted that kind of plant might be sort of in our societal or, group memory, I mean, not everywhere, but just kind of concepts like that.
Yeah, well, that rootedness really matters, from the first slip of lilac that you imagine the first settlers planting there, to the ones that you give away to the woman in the passage that you read,
Yeah.
to the enormous bush that what allows its fragrance to come into your house all spring, mostly in the summer. But you also have slips that you take from Chuck's parents. And so there's this generational exchange of things with roots.
Yeah, yeah. And those were from apple trees.
Apple trees.
Yeah.
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 How much did you depend on the Palmer Historical Society, and how did they help you?
Oh, I think for me, they're mostly a resource. And Chuck got involved actually as a volunteer with the Historical Society. So I don't know, individual people who are involved with the Historical Society provided a lot of help. And let's see, mentioned a few different places in the book is Ralph Hulbert, who he could always provide additional information about anything. And I assume Ralph is probably on this call, but with his wife. And anyway, so I think individual people, as a whole group, I wasn't particularly involved with the Historical Society personally.
Let's see, we have someone named, I think it's Susan Lamaggi.
Susan Lamaggi.
Susan Lamaggi. We talk about being rooted in Alaska, how being rooted in Alaska spoils you for living anywhere else. Did writing the book help you make the transition to outside?
Oh, probably not. Probably not. Why do people move? And for us, it had a lot to do with family and being able to be closer to family, and so that ended up affecting our decision to move. So yeah, I don't know. After that living in that house near Palmer was a unique experience, and I can't imagine I will ever be able to transfer that to any other place, or that feeling. But maybe it also has to do with how much older I am too. I don't know.
Another project in the works?
Oh, these good questions, good hard questions. I have a lot of poetry, so if I am writing, working on another book project, it would be to finish a book-length collection of poetry, which is, mostly finished. I have a lot of ideas, but I haven't gotten very far with them. What I have been doing, okay, so this is kind of a funny story, and some people on this call are going to find it funnier than others probably. So let's see, I said about 2012, I think, is when I got going with really, more concerted revising of the manuscript. And about 2013, one of my sisters loaned me an accordion. So I started learning to play accordion. And in 2014, I started taking accordion lessons from Carl Clement, who I think is on this call. And so I was always making excuses why I couldn't practice more to learn the accordion, because I was spending hours and hours revising the manuscript. And I figured, I'm not exactly answering your question, that by the time that in the period, I didn't know how many years it would be, and however many, let's say 6 years. if it was going to be 6 years, by the end of that, if I was lucky, I would have a book and I would know how to play the accordion. If not, I would have one or the other.
Oh, that's great. Nancy has another comment and has a question in it. I expect it's in the book, but do you know what happened to the original people who lived in the cabin? I understand that most of the colonists did not stay or succeed as farmers.
So the descendants of the original colonists ended up living not very far away. So we knew where they lived. I do not think the original colonists, if they were still alive when we moved there, I don't know. So the place, so what happened though? So that when Chuck and I bought it in '83, this property with the house, it was 10 acres, but it had been part of an 80-acre, you know, the way the land was surveyed, 160-acre blocks, you know, made up a 640-acre block, that sort of thing. 80 acres for those in the 160. So there was an 88-acre block, and the 10 acres with the house was at the, I want to say back, but I'll say at the north end of that. And it had been at some point subdivided off. And so another farmer in the valley had the rest of that 80 acres, I guess 70, I don't know exactly what it was, I'm assuming it's 70, which was a big hay field. And when we moved there, that field was used for hay. And a few years later, I mean, this farmer was getting old and he subdivided it. And so, you know, some of that is in the book. So the land was, the use of the land was changing, and then it just became kind of a neighborhood with big lots. Oh, I think during the late 80s, say, mostly, a little more in the 90s.
Good. Susan again says she wants to talk about the cover of your book.
Oh, thank you.
Quite unusual. She said, kudos to Ruth for the wonderful map and great cover. Will you talk about the cover a little, please?
Oh, yes. So Ruth Hulbert, who's probably on this call too, I hope she is, designed the cover. And she's a valley artist, Matanuska Valley in the Palmer area, and just a wonderful artist. And she also works at Fireside bookstore. So she has very strong ideas on what makes a good book cover, because she spends a lot of her life with books. Yep. And being an artist. And so the interesting thing, the concepts for the cover, at first I was thinking, well, a photograph is good. That's quick and easy. You know, got tons of photographs on my wall behind me. And Ruth did some concepts with photographs, and we were like, so, and I had got to have a lot of feedback and give a lot of feedback on the cover, which made it very interesting. But the photos just didn't work. And then Ruth started doing art concepts. So every single, here's mine. Every single thing on the cover has importance. And there's little things at the bottom, tools and some different things, and a lilac and a spruce. So it's a very symbolic cover. And
all the tree rings, because there you have time again.
All the tree rings, and there's a lot about logs in the, in the book too.
Ruth said, yes, she's here. And okay. Benjamin Lodgson says, what do you miss most about Cabin 135?
Okay, and of course, I will say Ben is my oldest son, so.
Hi, Ben.
Well, here's, as long as I keep telling stories, I'm not going to answer that question. I'm going to answer the other question. When Chuck and I decided we were going to see if we could sell the house, and we didn't really think we would sell it because it was not a good time to sell a house in Alaska, and both of our kids were living out of state, and we called them and told them that, and they're like, what do you mean? You can't do that. That's a house where we grew up.
That's
So,
how kids are.
yeah, you can't do that. Wait, Peggy, tell me what the question was again.
Well, that's all right. Someone said, what do you miss most? But you don't want to answer that one. I was looking at the images behind you, and I assume you took those photographs. Could you talk a little about the relationship between the visual images in your photographs and the images in your poems?
Wait, and the image is where?
In your poems or in this book?
Or in the book.
You're writing.
I like to
Yes,
think
you're
of a book as being like about, I don't know, 70% a long poem. So I was trying to, so I hope people can see it. This is not the Zoom green wall. This is my real wall behind me. And they're close-ups of plants in different seasons. So there are probably most of these plants showed up in this book. In fact, I think they all did in some way. And I was just getting very, very new with digital photography. It was the very early 2000s when it was a lot different than it is now. And doing close-up photography and looking at colors and shape and time again. Once again, time. There's insects in these pictures. There's a lot of kind of ratty looking things that are during autumn that, you wouldn't put in a bouquet somewhere. And the colors. So I just really liked this. It was like being an explorer and discovering things that I wouldn't see normally. Actually, like the passage that I read with the orchid, is how carefully can you look at something and see something you didn't see before, and not having to spend a lot of money and go somewhere on a trip and go somewhere else. This was, all of these photos were taken within probably about 50 feet of that house at different seasons.
Yeah, I think the looking carefully and then becoming articulate about what occurs to us because of what it is that we're observing, that's really important. That's how the imagination gets sparked, and that is what happens a great deal in this book. My last question for you is this: what didn't we allow you to discuss? What would you like to say to your listeners and your readers?
Oh, that one's going to stump me. I just really hope that everybody has a chance to read this book and can. I mean, I want to share my journey that turned into. I mean, it's a literary sort of journey through, I guess, through my ideas and my experience, which is a strange thing to say. It took me a long time to feel comfortable about, like, yes, I want you to come on this trip with me, all of you, and just, see if it takes you anywhere else you hadn't thought about.
I love the way that there are times that the author thinks she knows exactly where she's going and she doesn't have a clue. Like, no, truly, you tear open a wall and discover a stairwell and don't know what you're going to do with it. Or there are times that you go out into not exactly the forest, but you go up on the mountain and take a turn and don't know exactly where you are. That seems to me a great metaphor for writing. We're very much going into the part that is unexplored, going into the part that we don't know how to get home from there. And that's part of what makes the writing exciting.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. Well, I really appreciate your spending all this time with us. How do people find this book if they don't know?
You mean if they where to buy it?
Yeah, where did they buy it, Nate?
I have an answer for that question. I would take the opportunity to thank again our co-hosts with Fireside Books. I'm gonna drop the link for people to find it online again in the chat if people are curious about that. I want to thank both.
Nate, excuse me, drop it in the Q&A because I don't think people can see the chat.
one second here. Let me make sure that that happens.
Okay.
Yeah, I will do that. And in the meantime, I want to thank you both for your time and your good thoughts, and really for being able to share the space with us on a Friday. I think it's thrilling and refreshing for me on a Friday night going into a weekend and spring season here in Alaska. This time of year makes me think all about honoring and understanding the things that we make and the things that we do and cultivate and build, and also our interface with with nature and the natural world. And so just like what a great treat, I think, to hear from Katie and to hear from you both, and to think about all of those connections, and to get our emotions and our neurons firing. Yeah, so thanks to you both, and thanks to everybody for being here. Please visit online. Please visit Fireside Books in Palmer. Please take a look at our website at uapress.alaska.edu. And thanks again to Peggy for being a terrific editor for Alaska Literary Series, and to Katie for being our terrific author. And please go buy the book.
Thanks, Nate.
Yeah, thank you, Nate.
Everyone.
Thank you, Peggy, and thank you everyone who came.
Bye, everybody. Thanks again. Happy weekend. See you again soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.